Øyvind, Olsholt.
Yeah. But you're I'm used to it.
I don't know if a long introduction is necessary. Perhaps Maughn, everybody knows or not yet? Director of the IAPC. Well, it's very clear on the screen, Maughn. Although.
There we go.
And Øyvind is from Norway and co-director of the Institute for Philosophy with Children and Youth.
Well, almost. I'll get back to that as well.
Okay. And I hope we have a first presentation of you and then Øyvind, and that we have some time for discussion.
Are you going to keep the time?
I'm going to keep the time.
Good.
How long do you need?
How long are we here?
20 minutes.
Say 20 or 25.
Yeah?
Okay.
YouTube, so that we have
Yeah.
half an hour.
Okay.
Can everybody see the screen? Or?
All right. Thank you for being here on the last session of the last day of the conference. It's very nice. I just want to preface, with your indulgence, I'm going to read, I've prepared a paper and I'm going to read parts of it, not the whole thing, of course. And I'm doing that because part of my reason for being here is to prepare a text that will clarify my own thinking about this issue, and I would appreciate any input you have about the text itself. So I'm going to be reading part of it. And then the other disclaimer I want to make is that this is going to be a very personal response to this issue. In other words, I'm not giving this presentation wearing my hat as director of the IPC. So I want to make that very, very clear, because some of the things I'm going to say may be somewhat controversial. I know that many of the things I'm going to say, people inside the P4C community will not agree with, and I don't know if that outside the P4C community. So please just take this as my own personal scholarship and thinking, and please help me as I go along. Okay? And I've personally been avoiding the issue of P4C religion for quite a few years, and it's only quite recently that I've decided to start exploring it for myself. And there are a couple of books that I'll be mentioning that have been very influential in my thinking, and one of them is the latest by Karen Armstrong. So I start with this quote from her. "We are meaning-seeking creatures, and unlike other animals, fall very easily into despair if we cannot find significance and value in our lives." And then this is a quote from one of the characters in one of the IPC curriculum. So I've got 4 sections to the paper, and I'm just going to read little parts out of each section. The first section is called Experience and Meaning. Philosophy means many things to many people, but I prefer to think of it as an endeavor of meaning-making. And the raw experience from which I believe philosophy is most suited to make meaning is experience. Experience can be meaningful in 2 related senses. In its immediacy, every experience is saturated with qualities, including sensory qualities like colors and sound, somatic qualities like arousal and fatigue, and emotional qualities like elation and outrage. Many of these qualities have positive or negative value for us, and so the meaning of an experience can be its immediate qualities and its value. Experience can also be meaningful in its relationship to other experiences, past, present, and future. It can, for instance, portend, cause, fulfill, complicate, enliven, dull, prolong, interpret, etc., other experiences. We refer to these relationships when we say that we have taken something from an experience. In such cases, something of the quality or the value, the meaning of one experience is carried forward into another, for example, by means of concepts, metaphors, memory, ritual, technology, or reconstructed habit. These two kinds of the meaning of experience, the immediate and the relational, correspond to the empiricist, the quote-unquote empiricist criteria that William James recommended for judging ideas or mental states as good or worthwhile. And so I have a small quote from William James. When we certain states of mind superior to others, it is always for two reasons. It is either because we take an immediate delight in them, or else it is because we believe them to bring us good consequential fruits for life. James called these criteria empiricists to call attention to the fact that their application in particular cases could be publicly disputed and verified, as opposed to criteria that can only be applied intuitively. He also warned that the true criteria do not always hang together. He said, quote, "The happiness and serviceability do not always agree. What immediately feels most good is not always most true when measured by the verdict of the rest of experience." In terms of deriving meaning from experience, James's warning is that the meaning we ascribe to an experience while having it may not be the meaning we attribute to it later. Philosophy is eminently suited to help us resolve such puzzles in its function of helping us figure out or to make reasonable, if fallible, judgments about the meaning of our experiences. But philosophy has another function with regard to the meaning of experience, and that is to make experience more meaningful, in both senses, to increase its immediate value and its relevance to other experiences, a function that philosophy has in common with all the disciplines. So that's my first section. I'm just talking about philosophy as one way of making meaning out of experience. Now, applying all this to religious experience. The principal contention of this paper is that this all applies to religious experience as well, that philosophical inquiry is an important method for making religious experience more meaningful, more immediately enriching, more accessible, more dependable, and more relevant to the rest of experience. The use of philosophical inquiry to discover and to increase the meaning of religious experience is an important alternative to the subdiscipline of philosophy of religion, with its preoccupation with mostly medieval arguments for the existence of monotheistic God. In philosophical and educational literature, though, and in my experience introducing philosophy in elementary schools, there is some trepidation about bringing philosophy together with religion, or more precisely about bringing the methods of philosophical inquiry to bear on religious doctrine, texts, practices, and history. However, I wish to offer two interrelated arguments, both borrowed from American religious critic Sam Harris, as to why this is exactly what needs to happen in elementary schools and in as many other public forums as possible. The first argument is a rigorous and unconstrained inquiry, including philosophical inquiry, is the only way to make religious experience more meaningful. If there's anything worthy or true or of lasting significance in our sacred, mystical, spiritual, and ethical experiences, that meaning will not only be amenable to and verifiable by, but capable of being strengthened and improved by rigorous, open-ended inquiry. And then I have there's a quote from Sam Harris where he says, "There is clearly a sacred dimension to our experience, to our existence, and coming to terms with it could well be the highest purpose of human life. But we will find that it requires no faith and untestable propositions. If ethics represents a genuine sphere of knowledge, it represents a genuine sphere of potential progress and regress. Our religious traditions attest to a range of spiritual experiences that are real and significant and entirely worthy of our investigation, but we don't yet have a mode of understanding our ethical intuitions and our capacity for spiritual experience." Behind this line of reasoning is a belief in some kind of objectivity to spiritual and moral phenomena without recourse to supernaturalism. Harris draws this conclusion from premises in neurophysics and evolutionary biology. As I will explain soon, Karen Armstrong draws the same conclusion from her findings in religious history and anthropology. Okay, the second argument for the importance of bringing philosophy to bear on religion is situated in cultural politics. Unconstrained public inquiry based on careful scholarship and open communication is the only means we have of resolving ideological contentions that are the cause of so much violence around the world. In this regard, Harris writes, "We're fast approaching a time when the manufacture of weapons of mass destruction will be a trivial undertaking. The requisite information and technology are now seeping into every corner of the world, Given the power of our technology, we can see at a glance that aspiring martyrs will not make good neighbors in the future. We have simply lost the right to our myths and our mythic identities. It is time we recognize that the only thing that permits human beings to collaborate with one another in a truly open-ended way is their willingness to have their beliefs modified by new facts and an openness to evidence and arguments that will secure a common world for us in a spirit of mutual inquiry. That's the end of the Harris quote. Inquiry is the only reliable means we have for, on the one hand, making our religious experience more meaningful, and on the other hand, for putting down the violent conflict that almost inevitably grows from unquestioned religious faith. From these and other of Harris's theses follows that religious moderation, by which he means the avoidance of religious criticism in the name of politeness, respect, or cultural pluralism, is no longer morally defensible. In calling for indiscriminate respect for even the most outrageous religious beliefs, religious moderation ignores the chauvinism of most religions, the chauvinism of most religions, their incompatible and indemonstrable claims to exclusive truth, and therefore offers no bulwark against religious extremism and violence. Further, religious moderation keeps religious experience immature. Intellectual protectionism is actually detrimental to religion and religious experience. It isolates it from the arguments, obstacles, heresies, and points of resistance that should keep religion honest and provoke it to grow.
Just for me, it's going a little bit too fast.
Too fast? Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Let me take a drink. Take a breath. Thank you. The alternative to religious moderation is not coercive or political intolerance against religious faith, except in its own coercive and violent manifestations, but intellectual intolerance on occasions of public discourse. It means not compromising our methods of doing good inquiry when the topic happens to be religion or religious experience. At a minimum, it means being unsatisfied with nonsensical reasons and impatient with sloppy thinking. It means not relinquishing our entitlement as reasonable people to ask difficult questions and to expect reasonable responses just because we may be treading on a person's religious beliefs, as we ordinarily would not regarding her beliefs about history, epistemology, ethics, politics, etc. Of course, in the community of philosophical inquiry, we also cultivate respect, empathy, and perspective-taking, and are careful not to intimidate others. Intellectual intolerance is therefore in keeping with Locke's ideal of religious toleration, which was an appeal against coercive intolerance. Okay, I'm gonna skip ahead a little because I'm going to say that. Get there. Okay, so the next section is, let me just read this part. What becomes of religion when its meaning is partly determined by philosophical inquiry? Should we worry that it might lose its particularity as a mode of insight and ethical practice? That what is precious about our religious experiences will be killed by analysis or become indistinguishable from philosophical discourse? In fact, there is substantial evidence to the contrary, the most compelling of which I have found in the work of religious historian Karen Armstrong. In her 2006 book, The Great Transformation, the Beginning of Our Religious Traditions, Armstrong recounts how, I'm quoting, from about 900 to 200 BCE, the period that the German philosopher Karl Jaspers called the Axial Age, the great world traditions that have continued to nourish humanity came into being. Confucianism and Taoism in China, Hinduism and Buddhism in India, monotheism in Israel, and philosophical rationalism in Greece. I read Armstrong's book as the history of a dramatic change in the meaning of religious experience in these four regions, a change that has normative import for religion and religious inquiry today. In this section, I will organize Armstrong's findings into two contrasting modes of religion and religious experience. The construct is normative. It contrasts the pre-axial mode as dysfunctional and the axial as ideal. Oh, sorry, I should have. first category of contrast that I offer, so this is sort of my organization of her book, so it's a simplification and just the first category I offer is the functions or the objectives of religious practice in each period, which is one of the meanings of religious experience. Armstrong's work presents evidence that each set of religions was aimed primarily at two objectives strikingly different from those of the other. The first common objective of pre-axial religions was perpetuation of the cosmic order. Two versions of cosmology dominated pre-axial traditions, a cyclic and agnostic version. In the cyclic version, the rotation of planets, the recurrence of seasons, and the regularity of political order were maintained by religious ceremonies, including animal sacrifice and ritualized sex. Agnostic versions were narratives of a violent cosmic battle between rival armies of gods, or between good and evil, tending toward a cataclysm in which one side would annihilate the other. In contrast, the first common objective of religion in the axial age was ethics, or morality, which was manifested in terms of both kenosis, or an emptying of the ego, and compassion for others. Armstrong writes that it was by ethics, not magic, that humanity would wake up to itself and its responsibilities, realize its full potential, and find release from the darkness that pressed in on all sides. The second objective, common to axial religions, was an inner spirituality. Let me back up. The second objective to pre-axial religions was personal and tribal prosperity and supremacy. Religious ceremonies were conducted to obtain the gods' assistance in obtaining good harvests, healthy children, success in cattle wrestling, victory in battle, and to win the opportunity to join the gods in an afterlife of perpetual good fortune. As Armstrong explains, the benefits of religion were purely material and this worldly. Her phrases magical theology and chauvinistic theology aptly describe the functional aspects of these traditions. The second objective common to axial religions was an inner spirituality, or what I will call developed consciousness. As Armstrong explains, all the traditions that were developed during the axial age pushed forward the frontiers of human consciousness and discovered a transcendent dimension in the core of their being. The second category of contrasts is the institutional conservatism of the former and the iconoclasm of the latter, of axial. One form of pre-axial religious conservatism was an emphasis on metaphysics or theology, iterated as timeless doctrines based on archetypal cosmologies. Axial philosophers and sages, by contrast, eschewed metaphysics and theology, considered them to be distractions from spirituality, and mostly refused to spend time discussing them. Another form was reliance on authority in the pre-axial and using priests and kings as an intermediary between the divine and what the people wanted. And as opposed to, Armstrong documents the individualism, like the doctrine of self-reliance that grew up in the axial age, that even in religious traditions, it was the sage's responsibility to question and examine and challenge religious beliefs and test them in their personal experience and then adapt them. Another contrast is the purpose of rituals. The pre-axial rituals, the purpose was to, as I said, keep the cosmic order going and to win prosperity. And in the axial traditions, and mind you, these are the same traditions that have just sort of undergone a transformation. That's why the title of her book is A Transformation. But the ritual reformers made the meaning of these rituals an internal transformation, that the individual psyche needed to be transcended. The self, through the ritual, the self was transcended. I'm just going to skip ahead a little. Okay, but for me, this is the most important point. The final category is the underlying characterization of pre-axial traditions by a high level of anxiety rooted in egoism, and the underlying characterization of axial traditions by a profound sense of tragedy rooted in an unblinking acknowledgement of the universality of human suffering. In one sense, all religious practice is a response to this recognition of suffering. And the practices that were developed during the pre-axial and axial periods constitute divergent modes of response. The mode that manifests in pre-axial religious practices was a paradoxical attempt to escape from suffering by means of magic, aggression, greed, hierarchy, and other forms of hubris, while otherwise avoiding the recognition of the inescapability of suffering. Ironically, as axial philosophers would come to understand, this mode of coping with anxiety would only increase anxiety. Indeed, as Armstrong documents, the futility of this mode was one of the provocations that gave rise to the other. The mode that manifests in axial religious practice began with a frank acknowledgement of human suffering, but continued to give that suffering new meaning, the revolutionary insight into the relationship between suffering and egoism, and the possibility of reducing the former by reducing and even relinquishing the latter. This was the new meaning of religious experience in the axial age.
If you're telling that you already spoke 20 minutes, does that
Okay.
influence your
Okay,
last
so
5 minutes?
okay, yeah, so I'll just do this. So that was the third section. The last section is I'm trying to apply all this. Okay. So the three things I take from Armstrong are, number one, that there may be some objectivity for spirituality and ethics, because there's this historical record in these four very different regions of the world that sort of discovered the same things. Number two, that one of the ways that that happened in the axial age was through philosophical inquiry. So that kind of inquiry is not actually a threat to religion, it's actually a help. And the third is that when we do philosophical inquiry around religion, it tends to move it away from magic and toward ethics and spirituality. I realize those are mystical. So now the last section is just applying all of this to children's religious experience. And what I've done is I've gone to the literature on children's religious experience, and there's a lot that I have not read yet, but the stuff that I've read so far, I've tried to put together categories of children's religious experience just for the sake of looking at how that experience could become more meaningful through philosophical inquiry. So my first category is what I call the socio-cultural aspect. And in this I include children's participation in religious communities, in religious institutions with religious rituals and observances, and I include sacred spaces and religious iconography. And as the literature shows, that this kind of participation of children in these experiences can sometimes, on the one hand, make them feel more separate and bigoted and somehow ego-driven and pride. And on the other hand, the same experiences can make other children, or the same children in different contexts, develop social unity and a relational consciousness. Oh, that's what I just said. Oh no, it's not. So, and another aspect of this participation in the cultural aspect of religion, it can, on the one hand, engender conformist tendencies in their thinking, like they don't think they're allowed to think of God or ethics differently than what they're being taught. On the other hand, sometimes their experience can do just the opposite. It can prompt them to be more individual in their thinking. And again, depending on the way it's explained to them and what's going on, sometimes their experience with icons and with ritual can engender in them a more magical kind of thinking. On the other hand, sometimes it's very profound that the same rituals can induce in the children contemplation and turning inward and a discovery of spirituality. So obviously my thesis is that it's more meaningful as it turns from the one to the other. Okay, my second category of religious experience for children is the analytic category, and here I'm including basically their conceptual thinking about how they explain to themselves or how they make sense of all these things that are happening to them and with them in the name of religion. And in these interviews with children about their religious experience and their relationship to God, these two very different sorts of constructs come out. Like some children are describing God in a very pre-axial way, like an angry ruler, punisher, or somebody who's going to reward you and help you for doing the right things for obedience. And other kids talk about God as a sense of connectedness, a sense of tranquility, a sense that everything will be okay, or when I experience aesthetic joy in nature, then that's when I'm closest to God. They say things like that. And as they get talking like this, and as we know in philosophy for children, they become very puzzled and curious about how these concepts fit together. Like a lot of children are curious about, does God have any limitations? I mean, is God limited by anything, right? And where does God live? And why does God seem so distant sometimes and so close sometimes? And then they also find their way to theodicy. How do we how do we reconcile our belief in God with all the terrible things that are happening in their lives and in the world they see in the media? The third category is their ethical experience. And again, their participation in religious experiences tends to make some children interpret their ethical experience in terms of obedience to rules. And in the book I just finished, there was a lot of anxiety around this. Like, they both have experiences, and on the other hand, they have genuine experiences of connectedness and compassion and how good it feels to give and receive acts of compassion. The fourth category is phenomenological, by which I just mean how children describe experiences of awe and reverence, as well as dreams, visions, voices, and strong feelings to which they attribute religious meaning, such as these. But again, these strong feelings they have about their own relationship to God, it's like the children who talk about, what does it feel like to know that God is watching me and that God is out there? And some of them talk about it in a very joyful way, like there's an intimacy, and for some there's fear and there's guilt involved. So then the last part is why I think, this slide is how I think philosophy for children could contribute to children making their own religious experience more meaningful in the ways I've just described. In other words, the features of philosophy for children that would help, that I think are going to help children do that. For one thing, they're invited to wonder about things in philosophy. In philosophy, we problematize things that haven't been problematized before, and we invite that. Obviously, critical and creative thinking. Matt has a nice paper on the uses of critical thinking for religious education. And by caring thinking, I mean value-oriented thinking. I think it's important for children to think about what parts of their religious experience do they cherish most and would like to perpetuate and extend and make grow, and which parts of their religious experience do they find unpleasant or uncomfortable or somehow threatening or they would like to correct. And I think the way that philosophy for children, without directly teaching about it, brings in these other subdisciplines of philosophy like aesthetics, justice, metaphysics, and epistemology is very helpful to making more meaning. And then this is my very last slide. I'll tell you what it was. Ways in which I think P4C needs to be adapted if it's going to serve this purpose of helping children make their religious experience more meaningful. And the ways were, well, I can remember. One of the ways was this component of active experimentation and action that many of us have been talking about for the last few years, trying to bring an action component and a component of experimentation outside the community of inquiry to the process of philosophical inquiry. So we have our dialogue, we make some philosophical judgments, talking to each other, but then we take those judgments into our lives and experiment with them and see what happens, and then bring them back and keep going. Well, that's all right, sorry I was so trying to get through so much, and I'll stop, and then we'll change. Should I? You're not going
to. Maybe at this point there are questions not to discuss, but just to make
clarification.
Yes, only did show. That's it. Just questions, clarify some things, and then Øyvind.
Yep.
And then after that we have a little more discussion. Do you have a clarifying question?
Clarifying. Okay. I'm not sure about religion and spirituality. When are you using this? When are you using this? One thing. Then I'm not sure what are you trying to make a case for exploring or inquiring religion better, or proving or showing that philosophy of children is a good tool. And I will explain what I mean. I see a few paths or ways you can look at it. the relation between philosophy for children or the inquiry and the spirituality. It would be really when you clarify them. One is spirituality as an adjective. You say something, the spirit of mutual inquiry. So this happens, and we talk about the spirit of it as an adjective. Another way is saying spirituality as the content, the subject inquiry, which you emphasized a lot. We take experience of children, religious experience, etc. So this is the content. And the inquiry is doing this. Or spirituality, or being spiritual, is the purpose. Through this, through the inquiry, like emptying the ego, for example, I'm going very far to use it, in order to do better inquiry. So once you become more spiritual, you can do a better inquiry. So this is my question. Another question, which is clarification on a personal level, no? What is your...
I can't remember the first one.
I can't do it.
Perhaps first
So
let
remind
Maughn
me, is the answer now?
answer the first question.
No, this is personal. What is your personal motivation in doing all this, the exploring?
Yeah, okay.
This is interesting.
The first, I remember the first question: religion and spirituality.
Yeah.
I'm using the phrase religious experience to cover both. So and I tried to show in the and maybe it's not clear, but in the categories of children's religious experience, I include both experiences that are not that spiritual, that may, at least in the child's experience, may be just merely ritualistic or merely observational, formal. Although, of course, those can also be spiritual. So I'm including both religion, like formal religion and spirituality, under the phrase religious experience.
And the other question?
The other question, I didn't understand your second question. Sorry.
What is the role of religion or spirituality? What is the role of inquiry? If I understand...
Oh, my paper is only talking about the role of inquiry to make religious experience more meaningful.
For what?
For itself.
Why is it important?
Why is it important?
Okay, so I don't want to take all the time, but it's like, this is why the personal question. Why are you interested in this, and what will happen to you if this would be meaningful and important? The next
Or
thing.
should we keep it in mind, because I think it's
Maybe
more
so, yeah. I do have
to
some
talk about
things to say about that, but maybe we should.
only clarification.
Sure.
So I wanted to know about, I assume you know about Fowler's stages of development. His research
Whose?
is Fowler.
No.
Well, that's important. But assuming that there are stages of spiritual development.
Of spiritual development, okay.
So if you take a young child and ask him about his experience with God, and you talk about it, in theory you can only go so far. Maybe that's true in philosophy of ideas also. So then could he get stuck? That is, by talking about it when he's not, in a sense, ready to talk about it? Could he get
Is
stuck?
this question that clarifies something, or is it something we can talk about later?
No, I think it was a clarification, because I just wondered about the stages of spiritual.
I would be very interested to read about the stages of spiritual development, because I'm not familiar with that. I mean, the only from what you're telling me, it sounds to me like that would be one way that I could think about what it means for the experience to become more meaningful. Especially in the first sense of meaningful, of immediately valuable. Yeah.
Hi, just to clarify, what does it mean problematizing the giving?
Yeah,
What does that mean?
It's a P for C sort of term. It means to make something that we've taken for granted seem like something we don't quite understand now.
Okay.
Like
To
ordinary
further
concepts
analyze
like
it.
good and true, like the philosophical concepts are things that we use all the
Right.
time, even friends, right?
Right.
But the more you think about it, the more puzzling it becomes.
Gotcha. Okay.
So it's one of our objectives of the curriculum that the situations of the characters make something that they thought was easy to understand become problematic for them, and now they realize it's much deeper than they thought.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Let's stop this first
Okay.
part and the questions and
Yeah, I just continue. Can I turn this off? Is it good? You don't need it? You don't need it?
I don't need it.
It was sort of a
One more time. One more, there you go.
Oh, no.
That's it.
Right. Okay. I have the great honor to be the last speaker, for you at least, since you have, well, you could go now and attend somewhere else, but, then that person would be your last speaker. insofar as you keep sitting here, I'll be your last speaker in this conference. And I think, without knowing it, your presentation is actually a sort of foundation for what I'm going to say, because I'm going to report about a practical project that we're not so sure about the theoretical underpinnings of this project yet. We should have had your paper before. But anyway, we started it, and it is a project that I and Ariane, as you know, with a baby. And the baby, of course, yes, the baby is very important in this project. We have the Church of Norway, the State Church of Norway, contacted us because they wanted exactly what you've been explaining on. They wanted to explore how philosophical inquiry goes together with religious experience. And this initiative is a part of a transformation of the Norwegian State Church, which is a Protestant church. And as you may know, the Protestant church is not very exactly known for its well, tolerance and open-mindedness. Well, historically they're not. And we have, there has been a great deal of conformism and, yes, narrow-mindedness towards other religions and cultures. So it's a bit surprising that the Church of Norway should take this initiative. It goes to demonstrate, I suppose, that we live in total different times than we did only 30, 40 years ago, and the church themselves realize that they have to rethink their foundation if they are going to be a continuing part of the society. Well, that's my personal interpretation anyway. So, there is a huge amount of money. As you know, Norway is an immensely rich country. Well, I'm not boasting, I mean, it's a mere fact. because Norway was so happy to discover the oil in the North Sea 30 years ago, and we're like Saudi Arabia or some an oil state who have a lot of money, and we don't really know what to do with it. So one of the things that the government decided to spend the money on was religious education. And they allotted how much?
Like in Saudi Arabia.
Like in Saudi Arabia, is it?
It's a religious state, no? It's a joke.
Oh, good. Okay. So they decided to spend £4.5 million on religious education in the state church. So it was from these funds that our project was made possible. And the idea was, well, I've called the project is called actually Wandering Through Life, and that is because we participate with the pilgrim movement in the church. And the pilgrim is not a Protestant tradition. Pilgrim is more of a Roman Catholic tradition, but it also proves that the Protestant church is reorientating towards different practices. So pilgrimage is a new way of expressing religiousness in Norway in the later years. So then it was in a way natural that we try to combine pilgrimage and philosophy. So the idea was that a couple of philosophers go along with pilgrim priests. In Norway we have specially ordained priests that do pilgrimage and do this all the time. And they bring along youth and other adults to go for long distances, 3 or 4 days, or even longer. It could be weeks. We have a lot of time in Norway, so it's not
Time is money.
time is money, you know. Money is the object, so so months. No. And the idea is that we walk along, the philosophers walk along with the priests and the other pilgrims, and we join them on the journey, so to speak. And in the day, we walk in silence together, and in the evenings, we sit down and we reflect. And I haven't done this yet. I haven't gone through it. It's coming this autumn. So the idea is to explore what happens in that very particular context when we're together for several days, and we share the experience of walking in silence. I mean, the idea is that when you walk, thoughts and feelings start to flow through you. Some thoughts remain, others evaporate, and it is this special state of mind that you are in the end of the day that we are interested in exploring. How will that state of mind affect inquiry?
Can I just add?
Yeah, sure.
The pilgrimage, they're not going anywhere. I mean, they're not like coming to Jerusalem or going to a
Oh,
shrine.
yeah.
They
Oh, yeah.
are.
Yes, there are long traditions in Norway for the special pilgrimage routes, and there is a particular one church in Trondheim, which is a medieval church that is a very typical pilgrimage goal.
I see.
Yeah, but it's within Norway. Yeah. So, but this we're going to do this autumn. What we've done so far is to start the teacher or the church representative education. To start to educate the leaders in the church that are, and the purpose is that these leaders are going to facilitate philosophical inquiry with children and youth in the church, in the congregations, and in particular in the choirs, church choirs. And that's quite a big movement in Norway, church choirs. There are thousands of children all over Norway participating in these choirs, and especially the leaders for these choirs, who are also musicians or conductors, are going to receive training in how to facilitate. So this we've started doing. And time, points.
Time-wise, we just started doing it.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
But you still have, let's say, 15 minutes.
We had a weekend in January. We had first of all, we had a meter of snow in Lillehammer. You know, the place where we had the Olympics in '94. I always mention that because we're very proud of that in Norway. Lillehammer, and we had a weekend with the teachers or the adult leaders. And the fact was that these adult leaders are not adults at all. They're youth themselves. I mean, they're 16, 17, 18, 19 years old. So they're very young adult leaders. And what we did this weekend was two things. We had dialogues with them as a group, and then we used biblical text as a starting point for the discussion. We discussed a text from Exodus, when Moses brought water out of the rock, and we had from John, where Jesus heals a paralytic at the pool of Bethesda. John, chapter 5, 1 to 15. And both times we took good time. Time is it? We have it in Norway, of course, so we always take our good time. And we read the text 2 times. Yeah, read it through. We did it also the Lippmann style, that each person in the group read one sentence and then pass on to the next. We tried different approaches now. And these texts are like so big, and that's a lot of information. So that's why we read it twice, because we wanted to focus on, there is much information here, and we want to be so true, so faithful to the text as possible. Otherwise, there was no point in using the text. We could use a story, or we could retell it ourselves with our own words. But when we do use the text as a starting point, we take it seriously. So, and then refer back to the text when we do under the discussions. So, I just want to mention 2 questions that, and after having read the text, I asked the participants if they have any questions to the text, something that puzzled them or they found strange or funny or anything that arose their interest. And we have two questions that I will mention. There was, and it was in reference to the text from the New Testament, where Jesus heals a paralytic. And the first question was, were there more miracles when Jesus lived than there are today? Not very philosophical question in a way.
Yes.
Well, could be, but it's actually more of a quantitative question. Were there more? Well, we have to count them. So, well, anyway, the second question was it wrong of Jesus to ask the man to break the Sabbath? Because Jesus in this text, he asked the man to take his stretcher and walk away. And that was not allowed to break the Sabbath. So, did Jesus something unethical when he asked the person to do this? So, two very different questions. But we dealt with one question at a time. And actually the first question, that was about the number of miracles today and at the time of Jesus. Actually that's the one we spent most of the time dealing with. Not trying to find adequate examples of miracles today and comparing that with miracles at that time. But we were exploring rather the concept of miracle. We found that the concept of miracle was the basic concept of that question, and so we went to explore that. And also we went into the question of time, apocal consciousness, and if time is in any way relevant to the definition of what a miracle is. I mean, you could argue that there are no miracles today because we're in a time where there is no place for such a concept. So it was a problematization of the two concepts and see them in context with each other. Yeah, and okay, we had these two conversations with two groups, and it was quite yeah, I'll come back to you two first points. But I think the people that joined this had never done it before. They didn't know anything about philosophical practice or inquiry. So it was their first experience. And they were quite puzzled by the way we paid attention to the details. That first we paid very great attention to the text itself, and then when a question arose, we spent half an hour dealing with it and looked very much into it in a way that they were not used to. So I think that was their first response, the meticulousness of the approach, rigor. But in a positive sense, because they felt that they discovered something new by doing it this way. So, and the other thing we did this weekend was to have some training with them, and then we used some exercises that we have actually conceived ourselves. And I will mention shortly these two exercises. The first one is about asking questions and follow-up questions, because we've discovered that as a philosophical facilitator, it's the most important, or actually the most difficult thing to do, to think of good questions and follow-up questions when you have responses from the audience. So we wanted to train them, because they're supposed to be facilitators themselves, so we wanted to train them how to improve their skills in this field. So it was actually not a very religious exercise at all. It was a technical exercise, a skill exercise. And we were also curious to see how they reacted to that, because I think they expected something quite different than some sort of technical exercise when they had visiting philosophers. I mean, I suppose they said also, some of them, that they expected more like a metaphysical exploration or some sort of lecture to broaden their horizon. I mean, that we tell them, share our competence as philosophers with them. That was more like their expectation. But we did nothing of the sort. Instead, we pushed this exercise on them. And the idea here was that we divided into small groups, and each group was supposed to come up with a question suitable for inquiry. No further instruction, just produce a question that you think you can use in a group. Choose one of the questions, check if something is unclear in the question formulation. If it is unclear, reformulate it so it's better. And then the group produces an answer to this question. Choose one of the answers, and now produce a follow-up question to this answer. And then we asked it to create two types of answers, and the one was supposed to be clarifying question, like we had here. And the other question, follow-up question, was supposed to be problematizing. And actually, this distinction between clarification and problematization is very tricky. It's tricky to explain, and it's certainly tricky to use it to produce follow-up questions. But it's vital in order to maintain a rigorous structure of the facilitation. And of course, involved in these exercises were discussions with the participants. How did they understand the exercise? How did they grasp this important distinction? How much time was it?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. Okay. I will mention the other exercise as well, because just to get you a glimpse of how we work with them. Here they receive, we have this group, again, small groups, and we gave them some politically incorrect statements, and we asked them to produce arguments for these statements, pro-arguments to these statements. And those were statements like, man does not need God, it is all right for parents to beat their children, and the most important thing is to make a lot of money, and even Europeans are more valuable than other peoples. We tried to push their limits a little bit, and we were very strict in evaluating the type of arguments, because initially they come up with very weak arguments, easily gainsaid. Then no, try and produce a more solid argument, because these statements are representations of beliefs that people have had all over the world, different times. So it's not just fantasy. I mean, we're talking reality here, although it's highly politically incorrect, some of them. And at first, they felt sort of alienated, of course, in being confronted with that type of exercise. But as soon as they went into it, and we explained to them that the purpose of the exercise is not to make a new social order, but to try to detach yourself personally from the question so that you more objectively can evaluate any issue. Because you, as a facilitator, you will have questions, you will have statements from the audience that you don't like very much. You don't find them very sympathetic, and you would rather move on. But it's important to train the ability to be objective in the confrontation with the group's views, because it's not your job to, as a facilitator, to dismiss or accept viewpoints. So instead of doing that, you need to have an apparatus to meet those different viewpoints, and that's what we're trying to train in. So after a few minutes actually doing this exercise, they actually liked it, and they saw the point, and they saw actually the need for being able to detach from the issue. And also, this exercise is important in order to not fall into the pit of das Maughn with Heidegger, this sort of common cultural understanding, or yes, in this case, the generally accepted views in the church, which most Christian people in Norway automatically subscribe to. And in order to get out of that, it's also beneficial to have this type of exercise. So, yeah. I have a few minutes. Yeah. So this project is running for 3 years, and we're in the middle of it now. And the church is very keen to see if this is effective and positive, because if it is, they are very interested in transfer value to other arenas in the church. And possibly this could be a step on the way to inner transformation of the church life in Norway, actually, because they're very open to it. So it's about having a good project with solid foundations, and certainly the reflections you did, Maughn, would come in very handy there. So I'd like to have your paper. Right. Okay. I stop there, so we can have more time for discussion.
First, the clarifying questions.
Well, I wanted to know if the impetus of the church came from the top down or from the bottom up. Did the church sit in their little room and think, oh, we really have to change it, or is there a lot of complaining or not coming to church, or something that gives them a loud message?
Top down sounds like nature.
Right, the angel.
Yeah, well, you've got a point there. I think I have to answer that the initiative is from the top. And there are forces in the church that are a little bit resistant on the ground floor, so to speak, towards this kind of transformation that we're talking about. You have, well, not fundamentalists, but, you know, that kind of religiousness in the Protestant church. But they are decreasing in numbers, and their influence, political influence in the church is steadily decreasing. So I think, and this initiative is not only from the church, it's from the government, from the ministry. It's actually the ministry that has given this money to the church. So it's a national decision.
Yes, could there be a misuse of philosophy here from the church, in the sense of manipulating the people that they are losing toward their church? And below this, there is a risk for this church also, because when you teach people to think, maybe they will leave the church, going against what they want.
Yeah, but then I would like to connect to one of Maughn's first points, where he said that actual philosophical inquiry can strengthen and anchor the faith. It's not automatically given that philosophical inquiry takes you away from faith. And if there is, as Maughn said, if there is some objectivity, something that is eternally true in all kinds of religions and spirituality, then this kind of objectivity is something that should be possible to explore in an inquiry. So, well, it could go both ways, and I think the church is very aware of that. They know that they're taking a little bit of chance here, but I don't think they see another way out. Well, the alternative is to close down. Not now, but in 20 years. So they have to rethink. They have to do something.
I'll translate.
Creo que esto es, bueno, para mí, creo que es muy preocupante.
For me, it worries me a lot,
Me preocupa realmente mucho, éticamente.
ethically speaking.
Creo que a los filósofos, o los que estamos manejando filosofía para niños, nos ponen en una posición ética.
Those that we are handling philosophy for children puts us into a very particular ethical situation.
Porque lo que yo he estado viendo, bueno, un poco, lo que vimos aquí en Israel,
What I've seen here in
en
Israel,
las escuelas,
in school, the schools in Israel,
y un poco lo que estás mencionando tú,
and a little of what you're mentioning today,
si es que entendí bien,
if I understood it well,
estamos llevando un poco la filosofía a medios
we're taking philosophy to certain mediums
de los que posiblemente por lo que nació Philosophy for Children,
but because of the reason why philosophy for children was born,
era un poco separar, o sea, crear una nueva forma de vida, crear una nueva
to create a new, separate and create a new form of life,
fuera de lo que es religión, fuera de lo que es porque
Out of
todos lo
religion.
sabemos. Atrás de eso hay política y hay control.
we all know that behind this
No
there's
lo-
politics and control.
No lo hablamos
We don't speak it, we
abiertamente,
don't say
pero
it, but it's obvious.
no sé, posiblemente me voy un poco al futuro y veo filosofía de derecho, filosofía de izquierda.
Maybe I'm too far in the future and I'm seeing like a philosophy, left-wing philosophy and left-wing, right-wing philosophy.
What is the question, or is the question if Øyvind sees the danger, or?
Is there something in the philosophical inquiry that is ethically dubious or problematic in your view? Is there something in the practice that
No,
is
me
like...
preocupa
No, it worries me
que atrás, o sea, cuando tú llevas la filosofía, es para
When you-
sacar una verdad, para destapar algo,
when you use philosophy is to unveil the truth,
sacar sabiduría,
wisdom, to
Sí.
bring out wisdom from people,
no para utilizar a la gente
not to use people
para hacer algo en beneficio de alguien,
to benefit others,
pero mal, o sea, no.
incorrectly used.
Sí, porque al final de cuentas sabemos, me da pena decirlo, pero
I'm sorry
sabemos,
to say this, but we know,
y es muy delicado que lo diga,
it's very delicate for me to say this,
pero sabemos que atrás de las religiones hay manipulación de la gente
that behind religions there's manipulation of people.
y no hay paz allá afuera porque hay manipulación
And there's
atrás.
no peace out there because religions are manipulating people.
Pero entonces, ¿cuál es el objetivo real, profundo, verdadero, ético
Which is the real, deep, ethical purpose
de la filosofía, de llevar
of
filosofía?
taking philosophy to the streets?
De llevar
Okay.
filosofía a los niños para
The
las nuevas
children.
generaciones dentro de 25 años.
For the new civilization in the next 25 years.
Right. So, philosophy then. You mean you have to be careful? You have to be careful with
Misusing.
philosophy because we're in fact moving into a field where religion and spirituality resides. We're moving into that territory, so to speak, and then we have to tread carefully. Is that your point?
Yes.
Okay. And was that sort of critique to something that I mentioned here? I just want
No, quiero saber tú qué piensas, ¿cómo?
She only wants to see how you think of this risk.
Okay. Well, I'm not a Christian myself, so I'm no personal investment in this. But I do respect the Christian people of Norway, and I have no intention whatsoever of taking their faith away. I think I have a more objective stance here, that it is interesting for me simply to see whether they actually lose their faith doing this, or if the faith is strengthened. I'm not concerned about it, because I think actually, because what Maughn said, that you cannot actually be sincere in dialogical inquiry and actually go poorer from that experience. I cannot really imagine that. So, if this inquiry has as a result that you lose your faith, well, then you should perhaps rethink your faith and try to regain it. And as such, I think this exercise or this inquiry is beneficial.
Maybe,
I have a clarifying question too. I think
yeah, but
I
let's.
understood it completely.
I would like you to ask Maughn to respond on this too, because can you misuse philosophical inquiry?
Well, I think you can do philosophical inquiry badly, so that it doesn't have its own integrity. But I think as we've constructed what it means to do philosophical inquiry within P4C, particularly with the community of inquiry and other things, I don't see it. And I think there's, I'm seeing the evidence I know it's controversial, but the historical evidence is to the contrary. I mean, to the contrary. It may, okay, let me say this. I don't think that bringing philosophical inquiry to religious experience will leave religious practices intact. I fully expect that it will cause some kind of transformation. But it will be for good reasons, and it will be for the purpose of making them more meaningful, making them more valuable, important, edifying, beautiful, sincere. Right? And so even if that means that the meaning of the iconography is changing, or the iconography itself is changing, the way we understand a text change, or we give up certain texts for other texts, and that's not for me to say, but I think that I expect there will be changes, but I expect that they will be for making religious experience more meaningful.
More meaningful, because the opposite could happen too. Less meaningful.
No, I don't think so. That's not what I'm saying.
No.
I think, particular religious practices or beliefs. Yeah, I guess if the meaning of a belief or the meaning of a practice changes, in one sense you're losing something. But I think that, like you were saying, if it's going to perpetuate, if there's anything valuable to it, it's got to be amenable to progress.
Philip had
Yeah. Quick question. From the point of view of the government and the church, what would count for the effectiveness of the research you're doing?
Yeah, what would count? Of course, what would count is a strengthening and anchoring of the faith. And they can see this visibly with the youth. And,
more members?
First, the point is that the members they already have, for example, in the choirs, what they see is that the boys leave. When the boys are 12 years old, they leave the church. Men, girls stay, but the boys leave. So one first indicator would be that because of this philosophical inquiry that they're exposed to, they choose to stay. And they find it worthwhile to do other church activities as well as the inquiry being only a catalyst to make them stay. And of course, in the long run, they would hope to increase membership in the church by doing this. But I wouldn't say that.
Is it because the government thinks it's an important social institution, church, for social relations, or they want to?
Well, in Norway, you must remember that we have a state church in Norway. So there is a very strong link between the state and the church. And this is under discussion in Norway now, but still it is, and therefore you can have the government to place a lot of money into the church because it says in the constitution that this country is Protestant per definition. So that's why actually you don't, not only do you want to put money there, but you have to, because it says so in the constitution. So
it's a little bit gratuitous to think that.
It's a bit.
Well, I'm just thinking that the having the inquiry will necessarily cast a light on the practices of the church that the church itself wishes to perpetuate. I mean, that it's going to enhance people's feeling for the church.
That's what they hope.
A piece of my paper that I didn't read that's very important to me is that the way I think of bringing philosophical inquiry to children's religious experience is the same way I think about bringing philosophy to all their other experience. And I think those of us who have experience doing philosophy with children would say that we're not imposing this ancient discipline on these kids who couldn't care less. That children are sort of inherently curious and wondering about these big questions, these big issues already. And they really yearn for a place and a tool and a method in which to get into these things and make sense of it for themselves. And all of the literature that I've read so far on children's religious experience documents this. The children say, and they say directly and they indicate in many ways indirectly, that they want the chance to make their religious experiences more meaningful and to make more sense of what it is, like to have their own ideas about God. And if they're different from what they're being told, to figure out why they're different. And to construct their own understanding of what's going on with them in religion. So I don't, and so Phil, in response to what you're saying, in my imagination it would be the sense that kids are already, maybe younger kids, are going to church or having religious holidays in the home, religious observances, and they wonder about what it means, and they're having religious rules taught to them, and to have the chance to explore, I mean, they want the chance to explore the meaning of these things, and doing so can only make those things more meaningful. I mean, even if they understand differently or they change. And I'm also responding to what you were saying about could they get locked in. I don't see how. I guess it's possible, but to me, I don't see how that is possible.
Because their mind wouldn't take them there yet.
Right. Well, again, though, we never push them to, like, we're not telling them, you need to be curious about this right now and you need to get into this. It's sort of like we're inviting them, what are the things that you're curious about? What are the things that you already have this felt disequilibrium or this felt uncomfortableness or curiosity about with regard to this experience? And let's make meaning out of it.
Okay. Can I just have one sentence?
Just
one sentence? Yes, it's one sentence. So in Judaism we have a concept of mikoach l'shem shamayim, which is when you do something for a really good purpose, it's for the sake of heaven. And it doesn't have an internal in itself a bad purpose. And I think what the two of you are talking about is inquiry that is meant in a good and positive way, and how can that turn out to be a bad thing?
Okay, let's go to the next question.
Yeah, well, I'm moving back in time and to clarify what, so I understood it actually completely differently from how you formulated it. I understood that you have the concern that by using philosophy to make inquiry around religion, you take away a refuge for people which have philosophy as something. Now you apply it on, so take away the philosophy, because religion as a basic is something that wants to manipulate people or something like this. You know, not to question, this will question philosophy more than it will question religion, or it could question philosophy as a pure tool.
What could question philosophy more?
The process you are doing. You are using philosophy as a pure, which is a pure thing to to investigate or to apply on something which is impure, and that is religion, because on the basis it's there also to manipulate people. That's what I made out of that.
All right.
And you, what you said was you endanger religion, or you might endanger religion with investigating, using philosophy to investigate the meaning of religion.
Well, okay. Shall I try again?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I think she has to say if she was misunderstood or not.
All right. Okay. In reference to her question, yeah.
Because I thought you misunderstood her, but maybe I misunderstood her.
No, probably I did. Yeah.
There was a question over there, here, and I'm not sure who was first. So maybe you first.
I will explain it in Spanish.
In Spanish, and who's going to translate?
You.
Okay. And you have to speak.
Habla fuerte.
Primero, estoy totalmente en desacuerdo porque la filosofía es algo tan riguroso que no puede haber una filosofía política como izquierda como derecha. Está la filosofía
Hang on, better you speak with sentence, then you translate it, and then you speak again, because now I hear maybe you can all listen stereo. I don't know.
I can write it in English.
Or just try again and keep it short. Then it doesn't have to translate much.
Y no sé, está una gran parte de la filosofía, a partir de ahí tiene varias ramas, que ya podría ser la existencialista, bueno, diversas ramas, pero en sí la filosofía no creo que pueda llevarse por ese lado político, por lo riguroso, lo metódico que
This is already quite a long sentence for you to translate.
She's saying that philosophy has several branches, and that she disagrees or does not believe that philosophy can be wrongly used because philosophy has a very rigid, a strong methodology, so that would not happen.
So the ethical qualm that you have is no problem.
Well, I have problems with humans, not with philosophy.
Right. Yeah.
But let's go back to her question.
luego lo que se aplica filosofía para niños no es en sí para ir como por ejemplo en el catolicismo a evangelizar, sino a partir de ya creyentes se utiliza este programa. Entonces ahí no le veo en ningún caso el modo de un poder, y eso en ninguna otra religión lo veo.
She's saying that she doesn't see this use of philosophy as a proselytism, I don't know the word, proselytizing, like the Catholic Church proselytize. So what she sees is that the Catholic people are already Catholic, then they will use the philosophy.
Y en cuanto a lo ético, justamente lo veo como es algo religioso en sí, no tanto, es muy diferente lo religioso como la religión católica judaica en sí. Entonces, es algo religioso que incluye, en lugar de excluir religiones, excluir varias ideologías, incluye tu forma de pensar y te abre a nuevas ideas.
She says she sees ethics as a religious aspect, and as a religious aspect of philosophy, different from different religions. And religions have different viewpoints, and ethics sees all of them from a religious viewpoint in ethics.
That was your point?
It was not a question.
It was not a question. That's, you have a question.
Yeah, I've got a question for Maughn, and I've written it down because otherwise I felt like I could just go on. I'll try to keep it as brief as I can. I think it's an attempt to problematise a given.
Okay.
You said about in the community of inquiry we're careful not to intimidate others, and I mean I've seen from when I've been in community of fine and you're facilitating that's that happening, then you really are careful. I'm not trying to butter you up, but just say I see that as a genuine aspect. But I want to talk about religion within the context of diversity and privilege or power. Because I've been a facilitator for about 10 years, but also as part of being a classroom teacher in the UK. And it's occurred to me that the community of inquiry doesn't exist in a vacuum, but it's part of a culture which is represented through the curriculum. This is the idea of the curriculum being a selection of a culture. And there's lots of procedures, etc., that reaffirm that culture. And in the UK, the UK privileges through certain laws and through the curriculum, it privileges Christianity. There should be an act of Christian worship every day. In India, when I go to India, despite calling itself a secular state, privileges Hinduism. And you can see the differences in everyday life. And Israel privileges Judaism through different processes and institutions. And in all these examples, I'd say to be a minority and to be subject to an inquiry about one's own religion, if it's the minority religion, and to not feel in any way threatened in talking, I'd say that takes some courage. I'm talking from a vaguely Hindu background myself, but I don't have to go far in my family tree to see Muslims, Jews, Christians. Maybe that's not relevant.
What takes courage?
I'll read it because I'm struggling here. To be a minority of a minority religion within a culture that has privileged a majority religion or a religion, and to be subject to an inquiry or to a questioning about your own religion and not feel threatened in any way by that, to not find that in any way a difficult experience, I would say takes an element of courage. And this is where people might think it's a leap, but I'm saying if it takes courage, is it that at some level there is intimidation present? Yeah. And that if, going back to the start, we're careful not to intimidate others as P4Cers, does it almost necessarily follow that we need to be attempting to dismantle those processes that bring about that intimidation, that bring about that privileging of a religion?
Absolutely yes.
Well, your answer was a lot shorter than my question.
This is something that Darren and I have talked about personally and also through exchange of papers and ideas, so I think I understand what you're getting at, and I really appreciate the question. To me, it's related to the phenomenon of, well, depending on what's being talked about in the community of inquiry, there are going to be different kinds of minorities and majorities. When those minorities and majorities are racial, ethnic, religious, sexual, etc., then it can become very intimidating and very delicate. And I think that when I'm working with teachers, I try to explain that you've got to be aware of that, and you've got to be willing to, in some cases, just not have the conversation. Because there's no way to have it in that context at that time with those kids without certain people being intimidated or being hurt. And in a simplistic way, I just say, if you can keep it safe, emotionally, intellectually safe, and you can keep it critical, then there's nothing that you should not be discussing. And this goes back to Talia's question earlier, of why I finally started worrying about this. And it's because as we're getting more and more into the schools in the U.S., religion keeps coming up as a reason not to do philosophy. So there's an Orthodox Jewish community in Livingston, New Jersey, that didn't want P4C in their school, or if they did, they wanted to exclude their children. And I'm down south in Georgia, where the Southern Baptists are the majority religion, and most of their parents didn't want philosophy in the school. So I was sort of forced to come up with and then that got me thinking. And then Darren wrote this lovely, provocative piece in the Superior newsletter asking questions, kind of like the one he's just asked, that got me to thinking and worrying about it. So, and I've said at teacher workshops, if you don't trust yourself and these kids you're with today to keep it safe and to remain being able to think critically about it, then you should say so, and you should say, we're not mature enough as a community of inquiry to handle this question right now. I hope that in the future we will be. But for me, the issue of intimidation, intimidation I think there is a symbol for other kinds of oppression. But that issue to me trumps the issue of going on with the inquiry.
How will you know that it's safe?
There was another question.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, what did you get out of this project working with the audience?
Well, lots of money.
And a lot of time.
And time. That was finally a simple question. Sorry.
Well, apart from what he just mentioned, the project hasn't finished, and we're in the middle of it. But so far, we are. I think it's a bit too early to say what I actually gained personally by it, because we're in the process of actually implementing it, trying to get it into the right channels to get the right contact persons and to know, and lots of practical things that have to be arranged. And as I mentioned also, we haven't even tried this pilgrimage and philosophy yet. It is yet to come. So, yes, so far I've, of course I've come into the organization of the church that I haven't had contact with since I was a child. So it is interesting to see for me now how today's youth, Christian youth, differ from the kind of Christian youth I grew up with. And there I have a perfect meter or measurement of how times are changing, because there are similarities between the times and there are differences. And I find it interesting to observe, at least.
Can I ask a question with this? Before you started this project, did you question yourself if I'm going to walk all day in silence and talk after that with these children about what they think and the ideas that you have all kind of feelings, perhaps religious experiences by walking? Do I want to have these experiences?
Well, as I said in my presentation, an important point for us is to sort of boil down the philosophical aspect here, like presenting these almost technical exercises, so that just in order to avoid this intimidation, Darren, you with us?
Yeah. No, I'm listening.
Yeah. Just this danger of saying too much, going too far without having actually a foundation to do it, so you cause intimidation, like you were talking about. One way of avoiding that for us in our project was to make philosophy in this respect more technical, less content-based, and just do some simple technical thinking skill exercises just for starters, just to get a feeling of how it is, questions, answers, the process of being in a dialogue. And then, if that goes well, we could move on to more touchy topics, or more personal questions, whether you agree with it. So it's a way of getting it in slowly.
What would be your question to both of you? I mean, what would be your criteria for measuring if it's safe or not emotionally for the participants? How would you evaluate that?
The first way is just by asking the participants how they're feeling as we go through the process. So when we introduce community of inquiry first to a new set of children, we talk about what it means, and we talk about the cognitive and the social aspects, and the aspect of emotional safety and intellectual safety, and collaboration and cooperation as opposed to competition, all this kind of stuff. And then we have simple ways that we evaluate each session at the end. And one of those is to talk about how it felt. Did people feel like it was a free space? Did people feel like you were being laughed at? Or, you know, are you saying things and then people bringing them to you later in an intimidating way? Like, are you being threatened on the playground because of what happens? And because we're reflecting on the process and as part of the process regularly, then they feel entitled to say so. That's one way.
Another way is to make them work so hard that this question never comes up. They haven't had time to reflect whether they are insulted or not.
But can I also say, it's a beautiful thing when you do reach a point in a community of inquiry where kids start to say things like, I could never have said this at the beginning of the year because I didn't trust you well enough. So going back to our last session on trust, right? Or this is something I could only say in this I can't even say this at home. Like Christine has some beautiful stories about that. But like, and Bell Hooks writes about that home was not the place where she had a voice and she could actually explore ideas. But school was that place for her. And kids say things like that. And I know, and they know how to transition back and forth. But and maybe even not during the whole day with the same teacher, but when we're in their philosophy circle, and when we're toward the end of the year probably, this is a time and place where now I'm going to start to tell you more personal things and more of what I really think about some things.
Yeah, the question, in your presentation you're using the term religious experience.
Yeah.
And I thought Darren was talking about religion.
Yeah.
Is that for you a difference? Because I think perhaps religious experience is something different than talking about religion.
Oh. No, I'm not sure how to answer that. When I'm talking about religious experience, I'm talking about the way I experience a religion. So yeah, in that sense it's different. I'm not talking about like trying to be objective about a particular religion. I'm talking about my religious experiences.
So what your parents tell you would be part of that experience?
Yes, it would be. That would be part of the experience. My participation in religious holidays is another aspect. My thinking about God, my questions about how to reconcile the different concepts that I'm hearing about God, my dreams that seem to have religious content for me, my feelings, and I'm just taking this from how kids talk about their religious experiences. So it's both a very personal sort of experience with awe and reverence, and also the ritualistic and more formal.
The schedule says that we have to be at 1800 hours in the room next door for the closing of the conference. Is there a last question in this group for these two gentlemen? No? Then I think we adjourn.